The howling wind tore at the small covered wagon like a hungry beast, threatening to rip it apart as Abigail Varley clutched her children close to her chest. The blizzard of 1874 had descended upon Montana territory without warning, transforming the late November afternoon into a frozen nightmare. What had begun as a journey to Fort Benton had become a desperate struggle for survival. "Mama, I'm scared," whispered 6-year-old Emma, her small body shivering despite being wrapped in every blanket Abigail could spare. "Hush now, sweetheart," Abigail replied, her voice steady despite the fear gripping her heart. She pulled Emma closer while adjusting the bundle that was 4-year-old Thomas against her other side. "The storm will pass soon." But even as the words left her lips, Abigail knew they might be a lie. The temperature had plummeted, and the snow had been falling for hours, burying their wagon in a growing mountain of white. Her husband James had been dead for nearly a year now, taken by a fever that swept through their small Illinois town, leaving her a widow at 26 with 2 small children and dwindling resources. The letter from her cousin in Fort Benton had seemed like Providence, an invitation to a new life in Montana territory, where teachers were desperately needed. Abigail had sold what little they had left and purchased the small wagon and team of horses, determined to make the journey before winter set in. But winter had found them anyway, just days from their destination. The wagon creaked ominously as another blast of wind slammed into it. The horses had long since gone silent, and Abigail feared the worst for the poor beasts. They were trapped, the snow piling higher with each passing hour. "We need to keep warm," she murmured, more to herself than to her children. She had already burned most of the small supply of wood she'd brought along. The lantern flickered, its oil running dangerously low. Thomas stirred against her, his eyes fluttering open. "Are we there yet, Mama?" Abigail forced a smile. "Not yet, my brave boy, but we will be soon." She didn't know how many hours passed as they huddled together in the wagon. The children drifted in and out of sleep while Abigail remained vigilant, fighting her own exhaustion. The cold had seeped into her bones, making each breath painful. The lantern had died hours ago, leaving them in darkness broken only by the occasional flash of moonlight through the canvas when the wind shifted the clouds. It was during one such moment that Abigail thought she heard something beyond the howling of the wind. A sound that didn't belong to the storm. She strained her ears, holding her breath. There it was again, the crunch of snow, the snort of a horse. Was her mind playing tricks on her? "Hello," she called, her voice weak and raspy. "Is someone there? Please help us." For a moment there was nothing but the wind. Then a deep voice called back, barely audible through the canvas and the storm. "Anyone alive in there?" Relief flooded through Abigail's veins like warm whiskey. "Yes, my children and I were trapped." The sound of digging followed, snow being cleared away from the wagon. Abigail gently shook her children awake. "Someone's come to help us," she whispered, trying to keep the desperate hope from her voice. The canvas flap was pulled aside, and a rush of frigid air entered the wagon. Framed in the opening was a tall figure, his face obscured by a snow-crusted scarf and wide-brimmed hat. Behind him, Abigail could just make out the shape of a large horse. "Madam," the man said, his voice deep and rough, "looks like you're in a bad way. Our horses." Abigail began. "Gone, I'm afraid. Saw them as I was riding up, frozen solid." He reached a gloved hand into the wagon. "Name's Vaughn Jameson. You folks need to come with me right now or you won't last the night." Abigail hesitated only a moment before taking his hand. "Abigail Varley. These are my children, Emma and Thomas. Pleased to meet you, though I wish it were under better circumstances." His eyes, the only part of his face visible in the moonlight, crinkled slightly at the corners. My place is about 3 miles from here. It ain't much, but it's warm and the storm won't reach us inside. Vaughn helped Abigail and the children out of the wagon. The snow was nearly waist deep on Abigail, and she watched in fear as her children sank into it. "We won't make it through this," she said, panic rising in her throat as the wind cut through her coat. Without a word, Vaughn lifted Thomas into his arms, then turned to Emma. "Climb onto my back, little miss. Hold tight to my neck." Emma did as she was told, her small arms wrapping around the stranger's neck. Vaughn then turned to Abigail. "Follow right behind me. Step in my footprints. My horse will follow. We need to move fast." Abigail nodded, her teeth chattering too hard to form words. She grabbed what few belongings she could, a small bag with their remaining food, the family Bible, and a bundle of letters before following Vaughn into the storm. The journey was a blur of white and cold. Abigail focused solely on placing her feet in Vaughn's deep footprints, one after another. Her legs burned with the effort of pushing through the snow, and her lungs ached from the freezing air. Twice she stumbled, and twice the patient horse nudged her back to her feet. Just when Abigail thought she couldn't take another step, a dark shape loomed before them. A cabin, solid and square against the white landscape. Vaughn pushed the door open with his shoulder and ushered them inside. The warmth hit Abigail like a physical force. A fire burned in a stone hearth, casting golden light throughout the single-room cabin. Vaughn set Thomas down on a chair near the fire and helped Emma off his back. "Stay here," he said, his voice gentler than before. "I need to tend to my horse." As he stepped back outside, Abigail took in their surroundings. The cabin was small but well built and clean. A bed stood against one wall, a table and chairs near the center, and shelves lined with supplies along another wall. It was a bachelor's home, clearly, but one maintained with care. Vaughn returned a few minutes later, stomping snow from his boots. He unwound the scarf from his face and removed his hat, revealing features that made Abigail's heart skip despite her exhaustion. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 30, with a strong jaw covered in dark stubble, deep-set eyes that seemed to shift between blue and gray in the firelight, and dark hair that curled slightly where it was damp with melted snow. "Your things will have to wait until morning," he said, hanging his coat on a peg by the door. "Too dangerous to go back out there now." "You've already done more than enough," Abigail said, finding her voice at last. "You saved our lives, Mr. Jameson." "Vaughn," he corrected, moving to the fireplace where he added another log. "And I just did what anyone would do." "Not anyone would ride out in a blizzard," Abigail countered. She helped her children out of their wet outer clothes, grateful to find that their inner layers had stayed relatively dry. "I was tracking a mountain lion that's been taking my cattle," Vaughn explained. "Got caught in the storm myself. Saw your wagon as I was heading back." He moved to a cupboard and pulled out a pot. "You folks must be starving. I've got some stew left over from this morning. Won't take but a minute to heat up." As Vaughn busied himself with the food, Abigail settled her children closer to the fire, rubbing their small hands between hers to warm them. Emma's cheeks were regaining their color, but Thomas still looked pale. "Where were you headed?" Vaughn asked as he placed the pot over the fire. "Fort Benton," Abigail replied. "My cousin lives there. She wrote that they need a teacher, and after my husband died last year." She trailed off, not wanting to burden this stranger with her troubles. Vaughn nodded, his expression softening. "Fort Benton's about a day's ride from here in good weather. You were close." He stirred the pot, then glanced at the children. "How old are they?" "Emma is 6, and Thomas just turned 4 in September." "Brave little ones," Vaughn said, offering a small smile to Emma, who was watching him with wide eyes. You must be a good mother." The simple compliment brought unexpected tears to Abigail's eyes. The past year had been so hard, filled with doubt and fear, that hearing someone, even a stranger, acknowledge her efforts as a mother touched something deep within her. "Thank you," she whispered, quickly wiping her eyes before her children noticed. They ate the stew in companionable silence, the only sounds the crackle of the fire and the howling wind outside. The hot food revived them all, bringing color back to Thomas's cheeks and easing the worst of the chill from Abigail's bones. After the meal, Vaughn insisted that Abigail and the children take his bed while he would sleep on a bedroll near the fire. Too exhausted to argue, Abigail accepted his offer. She tucked her children in, then slipped under the covers beside them, surrounded by the unfamiliar scent of pine and leather that clung to Vaughn's blankets. As she drifted toward sleep, Abigail heard Vaughn moving quietly around the cabin, banking the fire for the night. A sense of safety enveloped her for the first time in months. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for tonight, they were alive and warm, thanks to the kindness of a stranger. Abigail woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of quiet conversation. Sunlight streamed through the cabin's small windows, reflecting off the snow outside and filling the room with a bright, clean light. For a moment, she was disoriented, then the events of the previous night came rushing back. She sat up carefully, not wanting to disturb Emma and Thomas, who still slept soundly beside her. At the table sat Vaughn, his back to her as he spoke in low tones to another man older, with a silver beard and weather-beaten face. "Worst blizzard in years," the older man was saying. "You're lucky you found shelter when you did." "We were fortunate," Vaughn agreed, then glanced over his shoulder, his eyes meeting Abigail's. "Good morning, Mrs. Varley. Hope we didn't wake you." Abigail quickly smoothed her hair, acutely aware of her disheveled appearance. "Good morning. And please call me Abigail." She slipped from the bed, thankful that she was still fully dressed, and made her way to the table. Vaughn stood, pulling out a chair for her. "This is Samuel Cooper," Vaughn said, introducing the older man. "My nearest neighbor, though near is a relative term out here. Sam, this is Mrs. Abigail Varley and her children." Samuel nodded respectfully. "Madam, heard you had quite the ordeal yesterday." "We did," Abigail confirmed, accepting the cup of coffee Vaughn offered her. "If Mr. Jameson hadn't found us when he did, I don't think we would have survived the night." "Vaughn's got a nose for trouble," Samuel said with a smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes, "and a habit of being in the right place at the right time." He turned to Vaughn. "I'll head back and let Martha know our guests are safe. She's already cooking up a storm, I'm sure." "Tell her we appreciate it," Vaughn replied, walking his neighbor to the door. After Samuel left, Vaughn returned to the table and sat across from Abigail. In the clear light of day, she could see him properly for the first time. His features were strong but kind, his eyes indeed a changeable blue-gray that reminded her of the sky before a summer storm. A small scar ran along his jawline, and his hands, wrapped around his coffee cup, were calloused and strong. "Your children still sleeping?" he asked, nodding toward the bed. "Yes, they were exhausted." Abigail took a sip of her coffee, grateful for its warmth. "Mr. Jameson, Vaughn," he corrected again, a small smile playing at his lips. "Vaughn," she amended. "I don't know how to thank you for what you did last night. You risked your own life to save ours." He shrugged, clearly uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Anyone would have done the same." "But it wasn't anyone, it was you." Abigail held his gaze steadily. "And I am grateful." A flush crept up his neck and he cleared his throat. "Well, we should talk about what happens next. The storm's passed, but there's nearly 4 feet of snow out there. The trail to Fort Benton won't be passable for at least a week, maybe more." Reality settled over Abigail like a weight. She hadn't considered what would happen after they were rescued. I don't know what to do, our wagon, our horses. I rode out at first light to check, Vaughn said gently. The wagon's damaged pretty badly and the horses. He shook his head. I'm sorry. Abigail closed her eyes briefly, absorbing the blow. Those horses and that wagon had represented everything she had left in the world. Without them, how would she get to Fort Benton? How would she start her new life? I have some savings, she began, her mind racing. Perhaps I could, Mrs. Varley. Abigail, Vaughn interrupted, his voice firm but kind. You and your children are welcome to stay here until the trail clears. I insist. I couldn't impose, it's no imposition. I've got plenty of room, plenty of supplies. He glanced around the cabin with a wry smile. It's not much, but it's warm and dry. Before Abigail could respond, Emma's voice came from the bed. Mama, where are we? Abigail rose and went to her daughter, smoothing back her blonde hair. We're safe, sweetheart. Remember the kind man who helped us last night. This is his home. Emma's eyes found Vaughn, who had also stood. She studied him for a long moment, then asked with a child's directness, Are you a real cowboy? Vaughn chuckled, the sound rich and warm. I suppose I am, little miss. I've got a small herd of cattle and a few horses. Papa told me stories about cowboys, Emma said, her eyes wide. He said they're the bravest men in the world. Your papa was a wise man, Vaughn replied, his expression softening. And from what I can tell, he had a brave daughter too. Emma beamed at the compliment, and Abigail felt a rush of gratitude toward this man who had not only saved their lives but was now being so kind to her children. Thomas stirred then, sitting up with his hair sticking out in all directions. I'm hungry, he announced, rubbing his eyes. Vaughn laughed outright at this, the sound filling the small cabin. A boy after my own heart. Let's see what we can do about that. As Vaughn moved to prepare breakfast, Abigail found herself watching him with growing admiration. There was an ease about him, a quiet confidence that she found appealing. And the way he spoke to her children, with respect and gentle humor, touched her deeply. Perhaps staying here until the trail cleared wouldn't be such a hardship after all. The days that followed fell into a comfortable routine. Vaughn insisted that Abigail and the children continue to use his bed while he slept on a bedroll near the fire. Each morning, he rose before dawn to tend to his animals, returning to the cabin with fresh milk and eggs for breakfast. After eating, he would head out again to check his cattle, leaving Abigail and the children to their own devices. Abigail, determined not to be a burden, took over the cooking and cleaning of the cabin. She found herself enjoying the simple tasks, taking pride in the way Vaughn's eyes lit up when he returned to find a hot meal waiting. The children, too, seemed to thrive in their new environment, fascinated by everything from the chickens in the small coop behind the cabin to the way Vaughn could whistle to call his horse. On the fourth day after their rescue, Vaughn returned from his morning chores with news. Samuel's coming by later with his sleigh, he announced as he stamped snow from his boots. Thought you and the children might like to see a bit more of the area. That sounds wonderful, Abigail replied, genuinely excited at the prospect of getting out of the cabin, as cozy as it was. The children will be thrilled. Where are the little ones? Vaughn asked, glancing around the empty cabin. I let them go out to feed the chickens. They've been cooped up for days. Abigail smiled at her unintentional pun. They're fascinated by the hens. Emma keeps asking if we can have chickens of our own someday. Vaughn's expression grew thoughtful. You still planning on heading to Fort Benton when the trail clears? Yes, Abigail said, though with less certainty than she felt before. My cousin is expecting us and the teaching position. Of course, Vaughn nodded, turning to hang up his coat. But not before Abigail caught a flash of something that looked like disappointment on his face. The visit from Samuel and his wife Martha was a welcome diversion. Martha, a plump, cheerful woman in her 50s, had brought a basket filled with fresh bread, preserves, and a warm woolen scarf for Abigail. "Can't have you freezing, dear," Martha said, wrapping the scarf around Abigail's neck with motherly care. "Montana winters are not to be trifled with." The sleigh ride was a delight. Samuel had fashioned a covered sleigh pulled by two sturdy draft horses, and they glided over the snow-covered landscape like something from a fairy tale. Emma and Thomas squealed with delight as Samuel pointed out landmarks, a frozen waterfall that sparkled like diamonds in the sunlight, a herd of elk moving gracefully through a distant stand of pines, and finally, the breathtaking view from a high ridge overlooking the valley. "That's Vaughn's place down there," Samuel said, pointing to a collection of buildings that looked tiny from their vantage point. 40 acres of the best grazing land in the territory. His pa staked the claim back in '52, built that cabin with his own hands. "It's beautiful," Abigail said sincerely, taking in the pristine landscape. "So peaceful. Peaceful now," Martha said with a knowing smile. "But you should see it in spring when the wildflowers bloom and the new calves are running around. It's a slice of heaven on earth." Abigail found herself picturing the valley in spring, green and full of life. And for a moment, she could see herself there too, her children growing up in this wild, beautiful place. "Vaughn's done well for himself," Samuel continued. "Built up that herd from almost nothing after his pa passed. Man works harder than anyone I know." "He's been very kind to us," Abigail said, watching as Vaughn lifted Thomas onto his shoulders to give the boy a better view. The sight of her son's small hands resting trustingly on Vaughn's broad shoulders stirred something in her chest. "Kindness comes natural to that one," Martha said, following Abigail's gaze. "What that man needs is a family of his own. This land's too big and too beautiful to face alone." The ride back to the cabin was quieter, the children drowsy from the fresh air and excitement. Vaughn rode alongside the sleigh on his horse, occasionally pointing out a hawk circling overhead or the tracks of a rabbit in the snow. That evening, after Samuel and Martha had departed and the children were tucked into bed, Abigail found herself sitting with Vaughn at the table, a pot of tea between them. The cabin was quiet except for the pop and hiss of the fire. "Thank you for today," Abigail said, cradling her cup in her hands. "The children had a wonderful time." "I'm glad," Vaughn replied, his expression soft in the firelight. "They're good kids. You've done a fine job with them." "It hasn't been easy since James died," Abigail admitted. "He was a good man, a good father. The fever came on so suddenly." She trailed off, the memories still painful. "I'm sorry," Vaughn said simply. After a moment he added, "I lost my father when I was 16, took over the ranch then." "No, it's not the same as losing a husband, but I understand how it feels to have someone there one day and gone the next." "It leaves a hole," Abigail agreed. "You learn to live around it, but it's always there." They sat in companionable silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Vaughn spoke again. "Samuel says the trail to Fort Benton should be clear enough to travel in another 3 or 4 days. Abigail nodded, surprised by the flutter of disappointment she felt. "I should start making preparations. I'll need to purchase new horses, a wagon." "I've been thinking about that," Vaughn said, his voice careful. "I've got a wagon I don't use much. It's smaller than what you had, but sturdy. And I could spare one of my teams. They're good horses, gentle enough for the children." "I couldn't possibly accept. It's not a gift," Vaughn interrupted, his gaze steady. "It's a loan. Until you get settled in Fort Benton and can afford to send them back or purchase them outright." Abigail was touched by his thoughtfulness. "That's very generous of you, Vaughn." "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll think about it," he replied with a small smile. "And maybe—" He hesitated, then seemed to gather his courage. "Maybe you'll consider writing once you're settled. Let me know how you and the children are getting on." The request was simple, yet Abigail sensed the deeper meaning behind it. In the week they had spent together, something had grown between them, a quiet understanding, a mutual respect that might, given time, become something more. "I'd like that," she said softly. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Abigail was up early preparing breakfast when Vaughn came in from tending his animals. His face was grim. "What is it?" Abigail asked, immediately concerned. "Trouble," Vaughn said, removing his gloves. "Found tracks around the north pasture. That mountain lion is back, and it looks like it took one of my calves last night." "Is that unusual?" Abigail asked, setting a plate of food in front of him. "For this time of year, yes. They usually stay higher up in the mountains during winter." Vaughn shook his head. "If it's coming this close to the cabin, it means it's desperate. Probably old or injured, can't hunt its usual prey." "Will you go after it?" "Have to," Vaughn said, his expression troubled. "Can't afford to lose more stock, and a desperate predator is unpredictable, dangerous." Fear gripped Abigail's heart. "But you'll be careful." Vaughn's eyes softened as they met hers. "I promise. I won't be gone long, just need to follow the tracks, see if I can find its lair." After breakfast, Vaughn prepared to leave, checking his rifle and packing supplies in a saddlebag. The children watched with wide eyes as he explained what he was doing. "Can I come with you?" Thomas asked, his small face serious. "I could help." Vaughn knelt down to the boy's level. "That's a brave offer, partner, but I need you to stay here and look after your mama and sister." "Can you do that for me?" Thomas nodded solemnly. "I'll protect them. I know you will." Vaughn ruffled the boy's hair, then stood to face Abigail. "I should be back before sundown if I'm not." He hesitated. "Samuel's place is 2 miles east. Follow the creek, he'll help you." "You'll be back," Abigail said firmly, refusing to consider any other outcome. Vaughn held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded. "I'll be back." The day stretched endlessly for Abigail. She kept the children busy with chores and games, but her mind was constantly with Vaughn. As the afternoon waned and the shadows lengthened, her anxiety grew. She found herself repeatedly going to the window, scanning the snow-covered landscape for any sign of his return. "Where's Mr. Vaughn?" Emma asked as Abigail prepared dinner, the worry evident in her young voice. "He'll be back soon," Abigail assured her, hoping her own fear wasn't apparent. "He's just making sure all the animals are safe." The light was nearly gone when Abigail heard the sound of hooves approaching. She rushed to the door, flinging it open to see Vaughn dismounting from his horse. Relief flooded through her, so intense she felt momentarily weak. "You're back," she said simply, stepping aside to let him enter. "I said I would be," Vaughn replied, his expression unreadable in the dim light. He removed his coat and hat, hanging them by the door. "Found the lion's den up in the rocks north of here. Old female, just as I thought. She's been wounded, probably by another predator. Did you?" Abigail couldn't finish the question, not with the children watching. Vaughn shook his head slightly. "She ran before I could get a clear shot. I'll have to try again tomorrow." Dinner that evening was subdued. Vaughn was quieter than usual, and Abigail sensed there was something he wasn't telling her. After the children were asleep, she confronted him. "What really happened out there today?" she asked, sitting across from him at the table. Vaughn sighed, running a hand through his hair. "The lion. It's desperate. Came at me instead of running when I first spotted it. That's not normal behavior." "You could have been killed," Abigail whispered, the reality of the danger hitting her. "But I wasn't," Vaughn said, his voice gentle. "I'm fine, Abigail." "This time," she said, unable to keep the fear from her voice. "But tomorrow." "I'll be more careful tomorrow," he promised. "And I won't go alone. Samuel will come with me." Abigail nodded, somewhat reassured. "Good, that's good." "Abigail," Vaughn said, his tone causing her to look up, "I've been thinking about Fort Benton, about your plans." "Oh, the teaching position. Is it something you've always wanted to do?" Abigail considered the question. "I taught in a small school back home before I married James. I enjoyed it, and it's a respectable way for a widow with children to earn a living." "What if there was another option?" Vaughn asked, his eyes intent on her face. "What do you mean?" "I mean." Vaughn took a deep breath. "I know we haven't known each other long, but I feel there's something between us, isn't there? Or am I imagining it?" Abigail's heart raced. "No," she said softly. "You're not imagining it. Stay," Vaughn said simply. "Not just until the trail clears. Stay here with me, you and the children." "Vaughn," Abigail began, overwhelmed by his offer. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll think about it," he urged. "I know it's sudden. I know you had other plans, but I've never met anyone like you, Abigail. You're strong and kind and beautiful, and those children of yours are a delight. I think we could build something good here together." Tears pricked at Abigail's eyes. "I've thought about it," she admitted. "What it might be like to stay. The children already adore you. And you?" Vaughn asked, his vulnerability plain on his face. "I'm beginning to," Abigail whispered. "Adore you, that is." A smile broke across Vaughn's face, transforming his features. "That's enough for me for now. Will you think about staying?" "I will," Abigail promised. "Truly." That night, as Abigail lay in Vaughn's bed with her children sleeping peacefully beside her, she stared at the ceiling and allowed herself to imagine a future she hadn't considered before. A life here, in this cabin, with Vaughn, watching her children grow up in the wild beauty of Montana. Building a family, a home, with this man who had saved them in more ways than one. The idea filled her with both excitement and fear. Was she ready to start over again, to open her heart to the possibility of love after losing James? And what of her practical concerns, her cousin expecting them in Fort Benton, the teaching position that would provide a stable income? Yet, there was something about this place, about Vaughn, that felt right in a way she hadn't experienced since, before James fell ill. A sense of belonging, of coming home after a long journey. Morning brought no clear answers, but a determination to give Vaughn's offer serious consideration. After breakfast, he and Samuel prepared to set out after the mountain lion. Abigail watched anxiously as they checked their rifles and discussed their plan. "We'll head straight for the den," Vaughn was saying. "With any luck, she'll still be there, weak from hunger." "And if she's not?" Abigail asked, unable to keep the worry from her voice. "Then we'll track her," Samuel replied. "Best not to let a wounded predator roam too close to homes." As the men prepared to leave, Emma tugged at Vaughn's coat. "Will you tell us a story when you get back, about the cowboys?" Vaughn smiled down at her, his expression tender. "I'd like that, little miss. You pick the story you want to hear and I'll tell it tonight by the fire." "Promise," Emma pressed, her small face serious. "I promise," Vaughn assured her, glancing up at Abigail with a warmth in his eyes that made her breath catch. The hours after the men left were the longest of Abigail's life. She tried to keep busy, to focus on the children and the household tasks, but her mind kept conjuring terrible scenarios: Vaughn wounded, bleeding in the snow, the mountain lion leaping from the rocks onto his unprotected back. By mid-afternoon, the children's restlessness matched her own. They had been confined to the cabin for days, and the novelty of their temporary home was wearing thin. "Can we go outside, Mama?" Thomas begged. "Just for a little while. I want to build a snow fort." Abigail hesitated. Vaughn had warned them to stay close to the cabin while he was gone, but surely a brief excursion into the yard would be safe enough. "All right," she conceded. "But just in the yard, where I can see you from the window, and only for a short time." The children cheered, rushing to don their coats and mittens. Abigail helped them bundle up against the cold, then stood in the doorway watching as they plunged into the deep snow, laughing with delight. She kept a vigilant eye on them as she returned to her baking, glancing up frequently to ensure they remained in sight. They were building a small snow fort, just as Thomas had wanted, their cheeks rosy with cold and exertion. It was during one such glance that Abigail saw a tawny shape slinking along the edge of the trees beyond the yard. Her heart stopped, then lurched into a frantic rhythm. The mountain lion. It had circled back, perhaps following Vaughn's scent, and now it was mere yards from her children. "Emma." "Thomas," she called, trying to keep her voice calm. "Come inside now, please, right away." Something in her tone must have alerted them to the danger. Both children looked up, their expressions shifting from joy to confusion. "But Mama, we're not finished," Emma began. "Now, Emma," Abigail said firmly. "Come inside this instant." The children reluctantly started toward the cabin, moving slowly through the deep snow. Abigail's eyes darted between them and the lion, which had gone still, its eyes fixed on the small moving figures. "Hurry," Abigail urged, her voice rising with fear. The lion crouched lower, its muscles tensing. Abigail knew what was about to happen a split second before it did. With a terrible grace, the predator launched itself from the tree line, bounding through the snow toward her children. "Run!" Abigail screamed, dashing out into the snow. "Run to me now." Emma and Thomas turned, saw the lion, and froze in terror. Abigail ran toward them, her only thought to place herself between her children and the charging predator. She reached them just as the lion closed the distance, shoving her children behind her as she faced the beast. The lion skidded to a halt mere feet away, its amber eyes fixing on Abigail with a predatory intelligence that chilled her blood. It was thin, its coat dull, clear signs of the starvation that had driven it to such desperate hunting grounds. Abigail backed slowly away, keeping her children behind her. The lion followed step for step, its tail lashing. She knew they couldn't outrun it. Knew that if it attacked, she had nothing with which to defend herself or her children. "Go inside," she whispered to Emma and Thomas. "When I tell you to, run as fast as you can to the door." "But Mama," Emma began, tears streaming down her face. "Just do as I say," Abigail interrupted, her eyes never leaving the lion. "Get ready. Now." The children bolted toward the cabin. The lion tensed to spring after them, but Abigail lunged forward, shouting and waving her arms. The distraction worked. The lion's attention snapped back to her, giving Emma and Thomas precious seconds to reach the cabin door. But now, Abigail was alone, facing a starving predator with nothing but her courage. She continued backing away, trying to edge toward the cabin herself, but the lion matched her movements, cutting off her retreat. The crack of a rifle shot shattered the tense tableau. The lion flinched, but wasn't hit. A second shot followed immediately, and this time the beast crumpled to the snow, a dark stain spreading beneath it. Abigail turned to see Vaughn running toward her, rifle in hand, Samuel close behind. Relief made her knees buckle and she sank into the snow. "Abigail." Vaughn reached her side, dropping to his knees beside her. "Are you hurt?" "The children were all right," Abigail managed, though her voice shook. "The children are in the cabin. They are safe." Vaughn pulled her against his chest, his arms encircling her with a desperate strength. "When I saw you facing that lion, I've never been so scared in my life." Abigail clung to him, the reality of what had nearly happened washing over her in waves. "You came back. You saved us again." "We'd been tracking it for hours," Vaughn explained, helping her to her feet. Lost the trail, then picked it up again heading back this way. We were afraid it was circling around to the cabin. Samuel approached, his rifle resting on his shoulder. That was the bravest thing I've ever seen, Mrs. Varley, standing between your young'uns and a mountain lion. He shook his head in admiration. You've got more courage than most men I know. Vaughn kept his arm around Abigail as they walked back to the cabin. The children burst out the door as soon as they saw them, running to throw themselves into their mother's embrace. I thought the lion was going to eat you, Mama, Thomas sobbed, his small face buried in her skirts. I'm safe, Abigail assured him, stroking his hair. Mr. Vaughn and Mr. Samuel saved me. Everything's all right now. That evening, after Samuel had departed with the lion's carcass, the pelt would be tanned, he explained, and the meat, though tough, would feed his dogs through the winter. Abigail sat with Vaughn before the fire. The children were already asleep, exhausted by the day's events. You could have been killed, Vaughn said quietly, his eyes reflecting the dancing flames. If we'd arrived a few minutes later. But you didn't, Abigail replied, reaching over to take his hand. You arrived exactly when you needed to, just like the night you found us in the blizzard. Vaughn turned to face her, his expression serious. I've been thinking about that, about how many things had to align perfectly for me to find you that night. If I hadn't gone out after that lion, if I hadn't taken that particular path home. He shook his head. It seems like more than chance. Providence, Abigail suggested softly. My grandmother would have said it was God's hand at work. Maybe she would have been right, Vaughn said, his thumb tracing gentle circles on Abigail's palm. All I know is that meeting you and those children has changed something in me. Made me realize how empty this place was before you arrived. Abigail's heart swelled with emotion. I've made my decision, she said, her voice steady despite the fluttering in her chest. About staying. Vaughn went very still, his eyes searching her face. And we'll stay, Abigail said simply, if your offer still stands. The joy that spread across Vaughn's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. It stands, he said, his voice rough with emotion. It will always stand, Abigail. He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. But Abigail met him halfway, her lips finding his in a kiss that was gentle yet filled with promise. His hand came up to cup her cheek, and she leaned into his touch, feeling as though pieces of a puzzle she hadn't known she was solving were finally falling into place. When they parted, Vaughn rested his forehead against hers, his breathing uneven. I think I'm falling in love with you, Abigail Varley. Good, she whispered back. Because I think I'm falling in love with you too, Vaughn Jameson. The trail to Fort Benton cleared a week later, but Abigail didn't leave. Instead, she sent a letter to her cousin, explaining her change of plans and promising a visit when spring arrived. The reply came back filled with joy and good wishes, along with the news that the teaching position had been filled by another widow from back east. Winter gradually released its grip on the land. The snow melted, revealing tender green shoots beneath. The cattle were moved to higher pastures, and Vaughn began repairs on the larger house that stood a short distance from the cabin, the house his father had built for a family that never grew beyond a widowed man and his son. It needs work, he explained as he showed Abigail through the rooms, some of which hadn't been opened in years. But it could be a good home again with some care. It's perfect, Abigail said, already envisioning curtains at the windows and children's laughter filling the halls. They were married in April, with the wildflowers Martha had described in full bloom across the valley. Samuel performed the ceremony in the newly renovated house, with Emma and Thomas standing proudly at their mother's side. The small gathering of neighbors who had come to know and love Abigail in the months since her arrival cheered as Vaughn kissed his bride. "Are you my papa now?" Thomas asked that evening as Vaughn tucked him into bed in his new room. Vaughn's throat tightened with emotion. "If you'd like me to be," he said carefully. "I could never replace your real father, but I promise to love you and take care of you as if you were my own son." Thomas considered this, his small face serious in the lamplight. "I think my real papa would be happy that you're taking care of us now," he said finally. "He always said that was the most important job." "Your real papa was a wise man," Vaughn said, smoothing the boy's hair, "and I'll do my best to live up to his example." Later, as he and Abigail lay together in their own bed, the moonlight streaming through the window, Vaughn pulled her close against his chest. "Happy?" he asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Completely," Abigail replied, snuggling closer. "Though I do wonder sometimes what would have happened if you hadn't found us that night." "But I did find you," Vaughn said firmly, "and I'll always be grateful for that blizzard, as terrible as it was. It brought you to me." "To us," Abigail corrected gently. "It brought us to each other." Spring flowed into summer, and the ranch thrived under their joint care. Abigail discovered a talent for gardening, establishing a vegetable plot that soon produced more than they could eat. Vaughn taught Emma to ride her own pony, and Thomas followed him everywhere, learning the ways of the ranch with eager enthusiasm. In July, Abigail shared the news she'd been suspecting for weeks. They were expecting a child of their own, due to arrive with the winter snows. "A baby brother or sister," Emma exclaimed, clapping her hands in delight. "Can I help take care of it?" "Of course you can," Abigail assured her, watching as Vaughn processed the news, his expression shifting from surprise to pure joy. "A baby," he repeated, his voice filled with wonder. He knelt before Abigail's chair, placing his hand gently on her still flat stomach. Our baby," Abigail confirmed, covering his hand with her own. "Another blessing I never expected to find in Montana territory." The summer and fall passed in a haze of contentment. Abigail's body changed, growing round with new life. Vaughn doted on her, insisting she rest frequently and enlisting the children's help with household tasks. Emma took her role as future big sister very seriously, helping to prepare a nursery in the room adjacent to the master bedroom. As winter approached once more, Abigail found herself thinking often of the blizzard that had nearly claimed their lives the previous year. How close they had come to a different fate, and how wonderfully things had turned out instead. "Penny for your thoughts," Vaughn said, coming to stand beside her as she gazed out the window at the first light snowfall of the season. "I was just thinking about last winter," Abigail replied, leaning into him as his arms encircled her, his hands resting on the swell of her belly. "About how sometimes the worst circumstances can lead to the greatest blessings." "Like being trapped in a blizzard?" Vaughn asked, his voice warm with amusement. "Exactly like that," Abigail agreed, turning in his arms to face him. "If not for that storm, I'd be teaching in Fort Benton now, alone except for my children." "And I'd be here alone except for my cattle," Vaughn added. Instead we found each other," Abigail finished, "and built this." She gestured to encompass not just the house, but everything their life together represented. The baby chose that moment to kick vigorously, making them both laugh as Vaughn felt the movement beneath his palm. "Strong," he commented, his eyes crinkling with delight. "Like his mother." "Or her father," Abigail countered with a smile. The snow continued to fall outside, gentle and peaceful, so different from the raging blizzard of the previous year. Yet Abigail couldn't help but feel a deep gratitude for that terrible storm. It had brought her to the brink of disaster, yes, but also to the doorstep of a love and happiness she had never dared to hope for again. December arrived, and with it, heavier snowfalls and colder temperatures. The ranch was well prepared this time, with ample supplies stored for both humans and animals. Vaughn had hired additional help for the winter months, a young ranch hand named Timothy who lived in a small bunkhouse near the barn, ensuring Vaughn wouldn't have to face the brutal weather alone when tending to the livestock. As Abigail's time grew near, Martha Cooper came to stay, bringing her experience as a midwife and her comforting presence to the household. The children adored her, especially her seemingly endless supply of stories and her ability to produce peppermint candies from the pockets of her apron. "You're carrying low," Martha observed one evening as she and Abigail sat by the fire, Abigail's hands busy with knitting a tiny cap. "My guess is it's a boy." "Vaughn would be pleased," Abigail said with a smile, "though he insists he'd be just as happy with another daughter." "That man would be happy with whatever the good Lord sends, as long as you're both healthy," Martha replied, her needles clicking rhythmically. "Never seen a man more in love with his wife, nor more devoted to his family." "I'm blessed," Abigail acknowledged, looking around the cozy room where Emma and Thomas were playing checkers with Vaughn, their faces intent on the game. "More blessed than I ever thought possible after losing James." "That's the wonder of life," Martha said softly. "The way it can surprise you with joy just when you think all joy is behind you." The baby arrived 3 days before Christmas, during a gentle snowfall that blanketed the world in white. The labor was long but uncomplicated, with Martha's steady hands guiding the way and Vaughn's presence a constant source of strength. "A boy," Martha announced as the newborn's cries filled the room. "A fine, healthy boy." Tears streamed down Abigail's face as the tiny, red-faced infant was placed in her arms. He had a shock of dark hair, like his father's, and when his eyes briefly opened, she caught a glimpse of the same changeable blue-gray. "He's perfect," she whispered as Vaughn sat beside her on the bed, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "Just like his mother," Vaughn said, his voice choked with emotion. He reached out a tentative finger to stroke the baby's cheek. "Hello, son. What will you name him?" Martha asked as she busied herself with cleaning up. Abigail and Vaughn exchanged a look. They had discussed names at length, considering family traditions and personal preferences. "James," Vaughn said firmly. "James Samuel Jameson." Abigail's heart swelled with love for this man who understood the importance of honoring the past even as they built their future. "James," she agreed. "It's perfect." Emma and Thomas were brought in to meet their new brother, their eyes wide with wonder at the tiny being in their mother's arms. "He's so small," Emma marveled, gently touching the baby's hand. Tiny fingers immediately curled around her larger one, making her gasp in delight. "He's holding my hand, Mama. He knows his big sister," Abigail said, watching the interaction with joy. "Can I hold him?" Thomas asked, his voice hushed with awe. "Of course," Abigail said, gesturing for him to sit beside her. With Vaughn's help, the baby was carefully transferred to Thomas's waiting arms, Vaughn's hands remaining supportively beneath. "Hello, James," Thomas said solemnly. "I'm your big brother. I'm going to teach you everything about being a cowboy, just like Pa is teaching me." The simple words and Thomas's casual use of Pa for Vaughn brought fresh tears to Abigail's eyes. Their family, forged in adversity and blossoming in love, was complete. Christmas that year was the most joyous Abigail had ever experienced. The house was filled with greenery from the surrounding forest, the scent of pine mingling with the aromas of baking, and the special dinner Martha insisted on preparing despite Abigail's protests that she should rest. Samuel and a few other neighbors visited briefly, bearing gifts for the new baby and good wishes for the family. The children received handmade toys and books, their excitement filling the house with laughter and exclamations of delight. But the most precious moment came after the visitors had departed and the children were asleep. Abigail sat in a rocking chair by the fire, nursing James, while Vaughn knelt beside them, watching his son with an expression of wonder that hadn't faded since the moment of his birth. "I have something for you," Vaughn said, reaching into his pocket to produce a small package wrapped in a scrap of blue ribbon. "Vaughn, you've already given me so much," Abigail protested gently. "Just open it," he urged, his eyes twinkling in the firelight. Abigail carefully shifted James to one arm, then took the package with her free hand. Inside was a delicate silver locket, simple but beautiful. "Open it," Vaughn said again, his voice soft. Abigail did as he asked and found inside a tiny coil of hair dark like Vaughn's, light like Emma's, and the reddish-brown of Thomas's. 3 children, 3 locks of hair preserved together. "I thought," Vaughn began, suddenly uncertain. "I thought you might want something to keep them close to your heart, even as they grow." Tears spilled down Abigail's cheeks. "It's perfect," she whispered. "The most perfect gift." Vaughn carefully fastened the locket around her neck, then leaned in to kiss her tenderly. "Merry Christmas, my love." "Merry Christmas," Abigail replied, her heart so full it seemed impossible it could contain so much joy. Outside, the snow continued to fall, gentle and constant, creating a cocoon of white around their home. But unlike the previous year's storm, this snowfall brought no fear, only a sense of peace and protection. They were together, they were safe, and they were loved. As Abigail gazed at the man who had rescued her from the storm and then stolen her heart, at the baby in her arms, and thought of the 2 sleeping children who had embraced him as their own, she knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The blizzard that had nearly claimed their lives had instead given them a new beginning, a second chance at happiness. A love story written in snow and courage, in kindness and hope. And as the fire crackled in the hearth, and her family slept peacefully around her, Abigail Jameson was filled with gratitude for the storm that had brought her home. Spring came early that year, the snow melting in March to reveal a landscape eager to burst into new life. James grew quickly, a happy, robust baby with his father's easy smile and his mother's thoughtful eyes. Emma and Thomas thrived as well, Emma excelling at her studies with Abigail and Thomas spending every possible moment with Vaughn, learning the ways of the ranch. "He's a natural with the animals," Vaughn commented one evening as they watched Thomas helping to feed the new calves. "Gentle but firm, just like he needs to be." "He admires you so much," Abigail replied, bouncing James on her hip as the baby gurgled happily. "You've been exactly what he needed, what we all needed." Vaughn's arms slipped around her waist, pulling her close against his side. "And you've been what I needed, though I didn't know it until I found you in that snowstorm." The ranch prospered that year, the cattle herd growing and the crops in Abigail's expanded garden yielding abundantly. They added chickens at Emma's insistence, and a milk cow that Thomas named Daisy. The house, once silent and neglected, now rang with the sounds of family life, children's laughter, the clatter of dishes at mealtimes, Abigail's soft singing as she rocked James to sleep. In July, to celebrate their first full year together, Vaughn took Abigail on a picnic to the ridge where they had gone during that first sleigh ride. The children stayed with Martha and Samuel for the afternoon, allowing the couple a rare moment alone. "Remember when you first saw this view?" Vaughn asked as they sat on a blanket spread over the lush summer grass, the valley spread before them like a painting. "I do," Abigail said, leaning against his shoulder. It was beautiful then, but it's even more beautiful now, because of the wildflowers. Vaughn asked, gesturing to the riot of color that carpeted the hillside. Because it's home now, Abigail corrected softly. Not just a beautiful view, but our place in the world. Vaughn turned to face her, his expression serious. Are you truly happy here, Abigail? You gave up so much your plans, the teaching position. I gained so much more, Abigail assured him, taking his face between her hands. A loving husband, a beautiful home, a family that grows stronger every day. I've never been happier in my life. The kiss they shared was deep and tender, a reaffirmation of the love that had grown between them since that fateful night in the blizzard. When they parted, Vaughn kept her close, his forehead resting against hers. I love you, Mrs. Jameson, he whispered, more than I ever thought possible. And I love you, Mr. Jameson, Abigail replied, her heart full to bursting. More with each passing day. As they made their way back down the ridge toward home, hand in hand, Abigail reflected on the journey that had brought them together. From the desperation of that snow-filled night to the contentment of their life now. It had been a path filled with challenges, but ultimately leading to a joy beyond anything she could have imagined. The ranch came into view below them, the house with smoke curling from its chimney, the barn and corrals, the garden with its neat rows of vegetables. And beyond, the endless Montana sky, blue and vast and full of promise. This was where she belonged, where they all belonged. A family forged in the heart of a blizzard, tempered by courage and sacrifice, and bound together by a love as enduring as the mountains themselves. As they approached the house, the door flew open and Emma ran out to meet them, her blonde hair streaming behind her. Mama, Pa, come quick. James is trying to crawl, Vaughn laughed, scooping Emma up into his arms as they hurried toward the house. Is he now? Our boy's growing up fast. Too fast, Abigail agreed with a smile, quickening her steps to witness her youngest child's milestone. Inside, they found Thomas on the floor beside James, encouraging the baby's wobbly attempts at mobility. Come on, James, he urged. You can do it. Abigail sank down beside them, her heart swelling with love for these three children too, who had survived the blizzard with her, and one who might never have existed if not for that terrible storm. Vaughn joined them on the floor, completing their circle. Look at us, he said softly, his eyes meeting Abigail's over the children's heads. Just look at what we've built together. A family, Abigail replied, reaching out to take his hand. The most beautiful thing in the world. And as James finally managed to push himself forward, inching along the floor to the cheers of his siblings and the proud applause of his parents, Abigail knew that she would forever be grateful for the snowstorm that had nearly taken everything from her, but had instead given her everything she could ever want. The years passed, each one bringing new joys and challenges. The ranch grew and prospered, as did the family. James learned to walk and talk, growing into a sturdy toddler with his father's curiosity and his mother's determination. Emma blossomed into a thoughtful young girl with a talent for storytelling, and a love of books that matched Abigail's own. Thomas became Vaughn's shadow, absorbing everything about ranching with an enthusiasm that made the neighboring ranchers predict he'd have the finest herd in the territory someday. In the spring of 1877, Abigail discovered she was expecting again. The news was met with jubilation by Vaughn and excitement from the children, particularly Emma, who declared her fervent hope for a sister this time. Another baby, Vaughn marveled late one night as they lay in bed, his hand resting on the gentle swell of Abigail's stomach. Our family keeps growing just like our ranch. Is it too much? Abigail asked, a hint of uncertainty in her voice. The ranch, the children, everything happening at once. Vaughn propped himself up on one elbow, looking down at her with an expression that still made her heart race after all this time. "It's everything I ever wanted but never dared to dream of," he said simply. "You and the children, this land, our life together, it's more than enough. It's everything." The baby, a girl they named Lily Grace, arrived in the early hours of a crisp November morning, with Martha once again serving as midwife. Emma was ecstatic to finally have a sister, while Thomas and James regarded the tiny newcomer with a mixture of curiosity and brotherly protectiveness. "She looks like you," Vaughn said as he held his daughter for the first time, studying her delicate features with wonder. "She has your nose, your chin." "Poor child," Abigail teased, though the happiness in her eyes belied her words. "Beautiful child," Vaughn corrected, bending to kiss first his daughter's forehead, then his wife's lips. "Just like her mother." As Lily grew, it became evident that she had inherited not just her mother's features but also her gentle spirit and quiet strength. She was a peaceful baby, content to observe the world around her with thoughtful eyes that seemed wise beyond her years. The winter of 1878 brought with it a familiar anniversary, 4 years since the blizzard that had changed their lives forever. On that night, after the children were asleep, Abigail and Vaughn sat before the fire in the main room, a glass of brandy shared between them. "Do you ever think about it?" Vaughn asked, his voice low. "About what might have happened if I hadn't found you that night?" "Sometimes," Abigail admitted, leaning against his chest as his arm tightened around her. "But then I look at our life, at our children, at everything we've built together, and I can't imagine any other path. This is where we were meant to be." Vaughn was silent for a moment, his eyes on the dancing flames. "I was so alone before you came," he finally said. "I didn't even realize how alone until suddenly I wasn't anymore." He turned to face her, his expression serious. "You saved me as much as I saved you, Abigail, maybe more." Abigail reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the lines that had deepened around his eyes over the years, lines of laughter, of concern, of a life fully lived. "We saved each other," she corrected gently, "and we keep saving each other every day." The truth of her words resonated between them as they sat in comfortable silence, the fire casting its warm glow over their entwined figures. From disaster had come deliverance, from fear had come faith, and from the cold grip of a Montana blizzard had emerged a love strong enough to withstand any storm. Outside, a gentle snow began to fall, each flake a tiny miracle of ice and light. But inside the house, built with love and perseverance, all was warmth and security, and the profound peace of being exactly where they were meant to be together. And as Abigail Jameson laid her head on her husband's shoulder, listening to the soft breathing of their 4 children sleeping peacefully in their beds, she knew that the blizzard that had nearly claimed their lives had instead given them the greatest gift of all: each other, and the beautiful life they had created from the moment a cowboy dug them out of the snow and took them in. Their love story, written in courage and kindness, would continue to unfold through all the seasons of their lives, a testament to the resilience of the human heart and the unexpected blessings that can arise from even the darkest of storms.